Wasn't out, Nathan.
And we're live on YouTube.
All righty. Welcome back, everybody. It's Thursday, March 20th, and this is House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. We are here today to talk about H278, an act relating to a plan on energy storage development. We'll go around the table and introduce ourselves in a moment. And I will just say that we're working backwards of our normal procedure. We had intended and hoped to walk through the bill first, but we were on the floor later than we thought and didn't earlier today and didn't want to have to reschedule Velco because they had been planning on this time slot. So we will go ahead and hear from Velco, ask any questions we'd like. But let's just keep in mind that Shauna is here to talk about Velco's position on the bill, and if we have positions about the legislative language or the bill in general, we should save those for Leg Council. Even though I realize that's a little opposite of how we normally do, but I was trying not to disrupt Shauna's day too much. So anyway, I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Scott Campbell, St. Johnsbury, Calgary, Essex.
Richard Bailey, Memorial 2. Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael South, North Caledonia too.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Jared Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Klipner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
All righty, and we have some guests in the room.
Jeremy Little, Vermont Chamber of Commerce.
Great.
Evan Kern, intern within the Grassing Group, 3L student at Vermont.
Great.
Jack Locker, committee assistant.
Super. All right. For the record,
You're
you need to
muted.
unmute.
Thank you. Good afternoon. For the record, Shayna Loiza with Vermont Electric Power Company, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Zakia, and I'll let Zakia introduce herself.
Turn it up.
So good.
Shayna, we're going to get your volume up.
Me.
I think we do that here. One sec. Sorry about that.
It's Max. Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
You turn up your mic at all?
Can you hear me better?
Say.
Yep. Well, it's okay. I think we'll just pay rapt attention.
Here, I can try a different microphone. Let's try this.
Okay.
Can you hear me better now?
No, that works.
We're good. We're good. Shayna, thanks. We'll just,
Okay,
we'll make sure everybody can hear. And thanks again for being here.
great. So I can repeat my name again if you could not hear it, but Shayna Loisel with Velco, and I'm joined today by my colleague Zakia El-Amari. And Zakia, I believe it looks like you're on. If you want to, on the screen and say
Hear
hello.
me? Yes. Can you guys hear me? My name is
Yes.
Mari, and I'm the senior transmission planning engineer with Velco. I'm happy to be here to give you an update on the transmission plan, the long range plan.
Great, thank you, Zakia. If it's okay to start, I'll kick us off. We received the request to come and we'll talk under the banner of H278, but with kind of specific request around reviewing the information that I had presented earlier this year around Vermont's long-range transmission plan, our grid capacity, our plans for long-term transmission upgrades and expansion as we see it based on the forecasts. And then there was a request around just kind of current state of storage and how we plan to expand storage going forward. So I'll leave it at that for right now. And we did provide some slides, so I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to hand it over to Zakia to dig in to the slides.
I know. And then when it's over, that's great, Shayna. We have them too.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I'm afraid if I go into presentation mode, it will not work. So I'm just going to leave it like this. And okay, so some of this information might be, you might remember it from earlier this year in January, but what we've done is build onto it to give you a little bit more detail about the long-range transmission plan, the specific areas of concern that came out of that analysis, and some of the work that we're doing now that the plan is finalized, and we're looking at non-transmission alternative solutions. And so with that, Zakia, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So this slide is about where we're at in terms of the generation mix, the resource mix that we have. So as you can see there, we have different types. So we have fossil, hydro, wind, landfill gas, biomass, utility scale, and small scale, and some hydro, methane, wind. So overall, as a total, you can see it's about 1,100. And what's important there to see is that the small scale solar, which is what's less than 1 megawatt, is right now about 550 megawatts. So of that 1,100, and it's growing, and there are different reasons for that. But you see the peak net for our winter and summer currently is about 1,000 megawatts. And so looking into the future, when we were putting together the long range plan, we took this into account, of course, and then we looked at what are the trends that are important to bring in, so we can model the study accurately. We looked at 2 years. We looked at 2023 and 2043, and so the next slide is about the resources that we estimated. So this is for solar PV. This is the RES, the Vermont standard. So we based our assumptions on what was the first tier 2, which was 10%, but it increased to 20%. So that you see in the gray lines, that's what we projected it to be. So in our analysis, we looked into what that would look like in our system, and we'll go more into details on that. But the key information here is that we used 1,300 megawatts as our target for the future. So we use the 1,300 as what we would expect that number to be, and we tested all various levels of solar PV penetration. So is somebody asking questions?
Nope.
Okay, great. So so there are a lot of information, but this is a condensed way to look at it. So we show you what we found when we performed the analysis. So this is for the roadmap scenario load growth, which includes a lot of what we see is going to happen in terms of electrification, whether it's EV or heat pump. So a lot of that work.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I do need to interrupt, I think, for a second. I thought this was like a cover sheet. We were going to be moving on, but if there are images loaded on this particular slide that you have up right now, we can't see those.
Yeah, there are none. It's just
okay, there you go. All right,
yeah.
So that was a cover page. All righty.
Yeah.
Okay. And Zakia, before I head into the scenarios, I just want to point out that the title here, Vermont Roadmap, it refers to that policy scenario where we are implementing or inputting the policy pieces from Vermont and beyond into our load forecast. So you might see that interchangeably in this presentation.
So this is 2043, so the 20-year look into the system. This is a peak case, right? So we looked at peak, what kind of issues we are seeing. And The orange dots, those are the transformers between transmission and subtransmission. And the blue lines that you see there, those are the transmission lines, the blue and the black lines. So the analysis showed that we had 75 miles of overloaded transmission lines by 2043, and 19 overloaded transformers. So you see the blue lines are the transmission upgrades that are needed, and the orange lines are orange dots are the transformers.
I guess I have some questions. Maybe you're gonna get into this, but so 2043, almost 20 years out. I'm curious about the assumptions or the data you're using to forecast that far down the road. You said the roadmap is based on Vermont's current policies. How do you guys model something like this that far out? And how do you, I guess, what assumptions are you making about where and how the lines would be overloaded?
Right. So the study itself was broken down by zones, and so we had 16 zones in Vermont, and each zones had its own trend based on the existing breakdown of load of demand. And in addition to that, we looked at the general goals in terms of how we see electrification going, the EV adoption, and heat pumps adoptions. And we looked at two scenarios: one where the policies that are existing and forecasted are adopted, which is what you see here. We call it roadmap or policy. And we looked at another case where it's more on the adoption is less than what we expect. So this would be the worst case scenario. And so from there, we basically took all of that increase in load, broke it down by substations, and used it in our simulation models. And so all of that was modeled in a system. So we have a model for each one of these transmission lines and substations, and we run the simulation based on those. And so when we look also at that, we have some requirements in terms of reliability. So what you see here is based on scenarios of losing one lines or two lines, and basically looking at it from that perspective, because we have some NERC standards that we abide with. So in 2043, we need to make sure that our system is reliable and aligns with those requirements. So we look at those scenarios of losses of one or two of the transmission facilities.
And as Zakia mentioned, I mean, she called it NERC, but that's our federal regulator who requires us to plan the transmission system in a very specific standards. And so I think she named it as, one loss and two loss, which we refer to as the N-1, one line it faults. We have to be prepared for that. And then we have to also have a robust enough transmission to prepare for the second fault on a line. And that's where that standard goes into play for transmission planning.
Okay, lots of hands up, and then I've got a follow-up question as well. I think Rep. Morrow was first, unless Rep. Southworth.
Yeah, so I understand this is worst case scenario, but if this was from the report that you gave us, I just want to confirm this doesn't include any storage facilities or any advanced load management that is available now or in the near future. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So, well, what we see here is the results of the issues. So you see all the issues in one map. We have not looked into solutions yet here, but you'll see it in the coming up slides where, there is an option of basically upgrading everything, right? That's one option. And then there's the option of looking at, okay, when this happens, if we had load control, can we reduce the load so that we avoid this transmission upgrade?
Thank you.
Chris Southworth?
At what point between now and 2043 do you envision starting to see the overloaded lines and transmission lines and transformers show up? And are you planning on upgrades to those lines prior to that happening?
That's a great question, and we're actually going to get into that specific question in the next 4 slides where we look
Okay.
at areas of concern.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. So, all right. So this is worse. This is one kind of modeling you do, or one aspect of your modeling that you do. So what we're looking at right now is worst case scenario in 20 years if you guys don't take any steps.
Correct. Yes. So yeah, that's a correct.
Okay.
Accurate estimate.
And just so you know, building this load forecast, it's not just Velco building out the forecast. This is a process. It's an 18-month long process with all of the distribution utilities through and a number of other public members through the Vermont System Planning Committee load forecasting subcommittee that does that work. And even though we just published this long range transmission plan, that subcommittee is going to be basically gearing back up in the next couple of months to get ready for the 2026 load forecast.
And it sounds like the modeling that you do, or the way that you have to do the modeling is, it sounded to me anyway like it was pretty tightly regulated, right? So this, I assume that you're following it. You had mentioned your federal regulators and stuff, so you're following, I would imagine, pretty circumscribed, I guess, modeling parameters. Like, right, you have to do it this way and that way, look at this or that, and churn out different scenarios. So that I think I know what I'm saying in my own mind, but it's not like you go down to Staples and purchase a piece of software to do your modeling. I assume this is a highly prescribed process.
Yeah, that's correct. And this is the pretty much the same software that is used across the industry. There are another 2 that are similar, but it's the same approach, and it's a federal requirements that Shana mentioned. So all the utilities across the board, they are using the same rules for their system, Velco included.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Thanks for explaining it much better than I was.
Should I move on to the projects deficiencies identified?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so going from the 2043 and 2033, what we looked into here is a shorter view, right? So we're looking here at the 10-year mark, and to your point, like when the problems happen, we are looking at starting at 10 years, what we can do in that time frame, because issues that happen within that 10 years have more priority than 20. So we are looking here at an example. So this is the northern Vermont area of concern. And what you see down there are the main issues that were identified. So we saw that in minus one contingencies, which is what Shana mentioned, losing one line or one generator and then using another line. So that combination, we found that in some cases caused thermal overloads and some voltage collapse, possibly. So we found that the transformers that were affected are there at Queen City, Taft Corners, and Barry, and you can see them on that map as well. And so the approach, the transmission approach would be to add a new line. So if we add a new line between Essex and Williston, which is what you see there in orange, that creates a redundancy so that the loss of the existing line between Williston and Taft's Corner is not going to create this problem. So that would be one solution. And in terms of timing, we looked into when that problem happens. And so 2042 winter would be when that line needs to be in place. Now, in addition to that, I'm hearing some echo. Do you guys hear the same thing?
Sorry about that. We're closing our window.
Okay.
A little quiet in here.
Okay, thank you. And so, so that would be the transmission solution. The non-transmission solution that we found that would work is to reduce the load by 75 megawatts by 2033. So by finding a way to reduce that load and keep that load to that level. So as load grows, we still need to keep it down. So that 75 megawatts will increase every year, but that's the number for 2033. And where do we reduce the load? It's in the northern area. So that's the area that has a direct influence on this overloads that we found. And so anything over that dotted line that you see there is where this load needs to be reduced.
Okay, we do have one question, Rep. Campbell.
Thanks. And I don't know if you said, what does NTA mean?
Non-transmission alternative.
Non-transmission.
Alternative.
Okay. And this area that you're showing here also includes the Shiai area, right? The Sheffield Highgate interface, is that what it's called?
That's correct.
Which is, I guess, is still has more generation capacity than transmission capacity. So there's still curtailing going on of the major wind facilities up there. Is that right?
So the 75 megawatts will come from the load rather than the generation. Because this overload happens because we are sending power to the northern area. In this case, there is a major load center around Taft Corner, Essex, East Avenue. So all of that load needs to be served by the system. And so when we lose that line, you see that issue there. And so by reducing the load north of that line, we relieve this overload that we saw there. So that's how the non-transmission alternative is. And if we do that, then we would not need to build the line between Essex and Williston.
Okay, I may have missed something there. How does that relate to the Shiai?
Sure, let me just chime in here. So Representative Campbell, the Shiai area, the distribution utilities, all of the Vermont utilities, there was a number of years where we were doing studies, assessments to identify what it would take to open that area back up. The cost was the problem because it would be borne by Vermont ratepayers. However, essentially, there were a number of upgrades that were made to the Shiai to alleviate some of that constraint. I don't have specifics on how often that area is being curtailed at this point. I don't think it is as often as it had been in the past. I can get back to you with more information on that. But essentially, that's probably only happening at very certain times of the year on those shoulder seasons.
Okay. All right. Just curious about that. All right. Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other questions on the northern Vermont area, we'll keep going through the next area, which is just south of that.
Yeah. So this is the northwest Vermont area of concern, which includes the northern area plus 2 other zones, as you see there. And so here again, you see we have some issues that we identified in this area, 2033. So there was a transformer that was affected, the Middlebury overloaded, and also the line, the West Rutland to Middlebury line, what we saw overloaded. You could see it in that map there in orange. So we identified the solution as rebuilding the West Rutland Middlebury line by 2029. And if we were not to do that, then another option would be to reduce the load in the Northwest area. And so that means all that area north of the dotted line. So effectively the 75 megawatts that we identified before, plus another 5 megawatts from the additional zones that we added there. And so that would be the solution if we wanted to avoid the transmission upgrades. Okay, Central Vermont area of concern is a wider area. As you could see, now we are going a little bit more south in the Vermont system. And in this area, we found some additional transformers, North Rutland, Cold River, and Winter that overload in minus one scenarios. And the solution would be to rebuild that corridor between Coolidge and North Rutland, the 115 kV line, by 2034. In this case, what we found is that in order not to overload these lines, that we needed to keep the entire load of Vermont lower than just below the 2033 load level. So you could see the line that needs to be rebuilt. It's in orange in that diagram.
So we're starting to see a pattern in this load reduction kind of as we travel towards southern Vermont.
Mm-hmm. Right, so this is the southern Vermont, which includes pretty much all the load there. And in this scenario, we did see that the transformer, the Vermont Road transformer, was overloaded, and also that we are impacting some of our neighbors' facilities. The Below Falls to Scottney line, GMP Vernon to Newfane needed to be rebuilt. You see in orange, there's that's the line that would need to be rebuilt. It's the need for that is in 2033, and so if we wanted to avoid this issue, then the loads would have to remain at their 2033 levels. Okay, this issue was an entire state, so the entire state of Vermont kind of issue, area of concern there. So we found that in this case we would need a new 345 kV line between Vernon and Eversource, and that it would need to be in place by 2034. And if we had to avoid that, then again, same scenario as before, that we needed to keep the load from increasing. Okay.
Can I have another question? And I guess you're going to get into this, but I just want to make sure that we don't forget. I don't forget it anyway. Are you going to give us some examples of non-transmission alternative strategies that could be implemented and how that's going to go? And I see later in a later slide, there's something about a study that you're undertaking about that, but I wonder if you could just give us some examples.
Right. So the approach that we took was a high level approach. So we basically looked at the most severe overloads, and we looked at where it makes sense to add a compensation. So in the policy cases, as you see here in the peak cases, this is a load problem. So we have a lot of load, and so not enough transmission and sub-transmission to carry through. So the solution would be a load reduction. And so we went to some judicious areas where we simulated that we had a generation that would be closer to the load, and looked at where that works better so that we avoid this issue. And so that's an example. And basically looked at the entire system, so issue by issue, but then also globally for the entire system where that makes sense. And then we rerun all these contingencies and made sure that with that additional help, with that additional load reduction, that we were not seeing these contingencies anymore.
So our long range transmission plan, the purpose of it is to identify the system deficiencies. The next step in the process is to go through a non-transmission alternative study that will be led by the distribution utility through the Vermont System Planning Committee process. So we have not done any of the looking at the various non-transmission alternatives. That will take place in the process that's beginning this year. So I hope that answers your question. The remaining slides in this presentation are painting a picture of, here is the grid capacity as it is today. Here are some of the elements that we have to take a look at as we're planning for the transmission system. And that includes both from a load side and a generation side. So what we've just done is walk through the load side of the equation. The next couple of slides, we're going to be looking at the generation, specifically around solar PV, because we've seen really meaningful growth of solar PV in Vermont, where, as you saw from that first slide, the generation resource mix, it adds quite a bit of generation to Vermont's mix. And then later on, we'll get into the load control, where we see from in aggregate and I should say flexible load management, that could be storage, but there are other load management initiatives that could take place of it. So.
Okay, that's helpful. I guess I'm reacting also to all of these slides show pretty imminent transmission increases necessary absent non-transmission alternatives, especially the one that says timing is 2029, which is next year, I think. I mean, in terms of building transmission, it must take some time.
That is true, correct.
Yeah. Okay.
But I should say that, and I don't know who pointed it out, perhaps it was you, Representative Campbell, that this analysis does not include any load management in the assumptions, and including electric vehicle EV charging management. And we did that purposely because we needed to know what the baseline of our reliability issues were. We know that the distribution utilities in Vermont are doing a really great job with their flexible load management initiatives, including their electric vehicle charging programs. And that's a lot of the discussion that will be taking place within that non-transmission alternative study group, to start applying the things we already have and then see where the delta is. And then talk about what other solutions, non-transmission alternative solutions, would be needed, stacking those solutions to meet that load reduction. At the end of the day, if that NTA stack of solutions is cheaper than what the transmission solution is, then that process has essentially done its job. I mean, it does its job either way, but it will essentially defer a multi-million-dollar transmission solution that may not be needed all the times, but only during the worst case scenarios.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
I have a question too. Welcome to the Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. We're questioning, Rep. Sibilia, and I've got one too.
Yeah, Shannon, can you go back one slide?
Yes, there you go.
So this is Rep. Sibilia. The just specifically in that place where we're looking at, would battery storage help there?
I'm going to defer to Zakia. My initial reaction is that any stack of non-transmission alternatives could help this, but I'm going to let the engineer speak directly to the question.
Hi, I apologize for that. Yeah, so yes, when we looked at the solutions, the non-transmission solutions, we were technology agnostic, right? So in the model, as long as we have a load reduction, it could come from anything. It could come from an actual generator, could come from battery storage, could be an actual load control. So we did not actively model a battery per se, but we did reduce the load by certain amounts, and you'll see it in one of the upcoming slides.
Thanks.
And before we move on, sorry, this is really helpful testimony for me, especially since I know we did this overview a long time ago when we were, still all new. So just 50,000 foot level. So I understand a little bit better. So I'm starting to get a sense of how your ongoing planning timeline or process works, and it's significant, which doesn't surprise me at all. So you guys are constantly, in this regulated environment, looking out 10, 20 years into the future. So you're in the process, when you do these 10-year transmission plans, of looking way out into the future to say, okay, if nothing changes or we do nothing, here's our worst case scenario. So how do we plan for that? And I think that what Shana said is that the next step then becomes, what are our non-transmission alternatives to manage this expected load growth or these areas of concern? So I'm thinking of non-transmission alternatives, I assume, being things like greater energy efficiency, managing demand, battery storage, anything you guys can do to reduce demand on the transition system without going to plan B or the other pathway, which is transmission upgrades, actual infrastructure. So you're looking, and then I think what Shana said was, and then we look to see, we weigh those two things out. How much where do we invest our time, right? Or what's cheaper, what's more efficient, what's going to yield better results, or what combination of physical infrastructure upgrades and reducing demand in certain ways or investing in storage, like what's our path forward? So that's a picture that's evolving in my mind. I don't know if that's off base or about right, or.
That's spot on.
Okay, it took me a while to get there, but I got there. Thank you so much. Rep. Howland.
So as we're looking at this on the left side, the blue going from the Massachusetts border, Vernon, up to New Haven, the blue's all 345, and the red is all red is 115.
Getting a little.
The Martians are coming in.
Oh, try again. How's that sound? Okay. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
So just to answer that question, yes, the 345 is blue and the 115 is red.
Oh,
Okay, and could you define for us new people what SHIA is?
Sure. The SHII stands for the Sheffield Highgate Export Interface.
Thank you.
Brett Bailey.
Could you, I remember vaguely, but I've forgotten it already. Could you give me the transmission cost sharing through, you believe it was ISO, that if we do some of this transmission work in Vermont, do we pay all of it? Or does ISO or whatever that other group? It was like a 95-5 or something split,
4% for us.
4% for us.
4%.
It's
If
based-
it,
based
yeah,
on load ratio. So correct, we're right about 4%. And that's a great question. And Zakia, are you back on the line? I think Zakia might be having some.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize. Yeah. Yeah, I'm here. And so the 4% is for facilities are considered part of the transmission pool, right?
Right. And so I think the question though is out of these deficiencies and the transmission solutions we've identified, would that be socialized with it throughout the region, or are they specific to Vermont costs?
Right. So if it's a transmission line that is serving the transmission system or a transformer that's part of the transmission system, and not only we identified it as an issue, but also ISO New England performed their own study and identified it as an issue, then yes, then there is a consensus there that's built on us paying 4% and the rest of the utilities paying the remaining 86% or 96%. Yeah.
So essentially, we would have to bring this project to the regional committee that makes those decisions, you know, both from ISO New England's getting their buy-in and also from other regional transmission owners and players.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not clear about how that process goes yet, but yes,
That's for another presentation. We do not want to get
that's
down
no.
ISO processes. So
Okay.
great
Brett
question.
Bailey.
Yeah, just one other follow-up. You would do that anyways when you were gonna do a transmission upgrade anyways, you'd bring that to that group? Or
Correct.
not? Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. All right, let's move into the generation side of our study. And
Right.
I'll-
So what we saw before, those are our peak conditions, right? So the load is at its maximum, and we are looking at the problems that are caused by that trend in load. What we see here is the opposite. So this is looking at what kind of issues we could see if the distribution generation continues to increase. So we are looking at a different time of the day. So we are looking more at daytime minimum load, where the load is at its minimum, while the distribution generation, and in this case mostly solar, is at its peak. And so again, you know, like looking at the forecast, one of the key questions is where are we going to put this growth of solar? And so this is what we used for that forecast. As you can see here, this is the actual DER or DG in our system, and you can see the progression from 2015 to 2033. And so it started a little bit slow and then it increased. And you can see that the concentration here is mainly on the residential areas with high concentration of population. And so when we looked at the trend, so how we get to 1,300 megawatts, we scaled up the existing DG that we have. So the 550 megawatts that we have, we looked at anything that's less than 1 megawatt, and we scaled all of that up into our system. And so we looked actually at each 100 megawatts, and you can see all those details in the report. But this is the 1,300, so the upper level of DG. So again, we ran all those contingencies, and we saw that we were overloading a total of 156 miles of transmission lines, and also overloading 10 transmission transformers there. And you could see them on the map there, the blue transformers and the orange line. So all of that would need to be addressed with that level of penetration of the
Projection.
And again, this is a projection for what year?
So yeah, so we targeted more of the level of DG. I would say based on, if you remember that trend, we saw the graph, Jana, the one that shows the res.
You want me to go back to it?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah, and so you see the green line, that's the 20% here. And so we would reach that 1,300 conservatively by 2033, maybe more, is when we would reach that. The load actually, the minimum load does not change as much between the years. It stays pretty much the same at the daytime minimum load. But we would say that 1,300 is, if everything continues the way it is, that we could reach it by 2033. Worst case scenario, I guess, at this point.
Okay, and again, that's with, you can hop back, sorry. So again, same deal. No, it's just assuming if demand or build out continues as projected based on your modeling with no other interventions.
Well, this is-
Correct. So if the
this is
DER
just-
adoption continues that way.
Okay, Rapala, did you have a question?
But so you're growing the distributed generation by 20% in tier 2 through those years, 2023 through 2033?
The 20% is more of a mandate that that the energy that the energy would be 20% of the energy would be sourced by comes from renewable sources.
specific for energy. So yes, you're right. It's connected to the renewable energy standard.
Right.
This was based on the former version before it was modified last year. And we took it as 20%. We were right around 700 megawatts or so for 10%. So this is very high level. We did this more as to better understand the story around how distributed generation growth looks like in Vermont and what it means from a transmission system capacity.
Great. Okay.
Okay, so this is another approach that we took to the solar. So we said, okay, well, we found all these issues. How about if we optimized the location of DER? So we took the system daytime minimum load, and we tried to fit as much DR as possible in the system without causing more than a 5% overload, as you see there. And these are all the zones that we targeted. So the red ones or the pink areas are where there's pretty much not any space left to add DR without causing issues. And down to the green area where you see there's a lot more room to add solar. And so that's kind of what the map looks like. And overall, when we actually used up all the existing transmission and sub-transmission capability of the system, and we added the optimized DER, came up to 1,053 megawatt. So we could reach that level without needing any upgrades to the system if we do it in an optimized way.
I'm going to move on to the load control section of the presentation.
Okay. So again, we're moving back to the peak, right? The peak scenarios. And you saw those overloads of the transmission system. So this is what we were talking about, a little bit more detailed on that, about what can we do to alleviate those issues without upgrading the system. And you see the breakdown there by summer and winter and by utility. So for winter peak, we found that we needed a load reduction that's about 439 megawatts total aggregate for the entire system. And in summer, it was about 400. And that load reduction, as you mentioned, could come from different kind of sources, right? It could be demand response, load reduction, batteries, microgrid solutions. They are, as long as it reduces the load, that would be a potential solution there.
Just stop right here to see if there's any questions before we keep moving.
I'm good. Everybody? Okay, I think we're good.
And similarly for the now going to the DR, so now we have an excess generation, and so we need to absorb that generation. And we do that by increasing the load in areas where it's helpful, and it will help us avoid those overloads that we saw before. And so that's what you see there. In total, it's about 480 megawatts that we need to balance out that 1,300 megawatt. And you could see there the breakdown is by utility as well. So when we added that in the system, that's the breakdown. And again, in this case, also, you know, the way we added it is a load increase. So it could be energy storage that is absorbing in absorption mode. So it's acting as a load. It could be by reducing generation in some areas. It could be by increasing load. Like when we have control over load, we could have a demand response in some areas.
So
Yeah, Rick Allen.
the Velco load, is that the sum of the other utilities that aren't included in the 5 that are there?
Right. So in some cases, what we found is that the best solution is on the transmission system. Some of these overloads were also related to the flow of power on our tie lines with neighboring systems and things like that. So adding this load at that level was actually helping.
Go ahead.
So the small munis, the Ludlow Electrics and Northfield Electric, are they included in the GMP because they take delivery of the GMP sub-transmission?
Well, I mean, this is not really an optimized kind of look at the load increase. We took more of a high level approach because otherwise it would take a long time to optimize all of these solutions. So it was more of an indicator, if you want. And our goal is that when we move to the NTA phase of this project, that we use this more of a guideline to actually look into the technology and the location a little bit closer and see, what can be done that way.
So I'm still confused with Velco having a load increase of 125 megawatts at GMP 250. Where's that 125 Velco load if you're only delivering through the 115 and 345 transformers to the distribution utilities?
Right. So this is an issue of excess generation, not rather than excess load. So we have this excess generation that's transmitted through the system. So it's going from distribution all the way up to the transmission system. And in some cases, the best solution was to add a load that's closer to the transmission system.
I think I have it now.
Right. Okay. And so it could be a battery that's absorbing, right? But as long as it's on those kind of locations, it was helpful.
Okay.
Okay, so key takeaways, maybe like a summary of everything we saw, is that this increase in demand, both on the generation side and on the load side, is creating some stresses on the system, and so we still need the transmission system to be robust to serve all of these increases in generation and in DER and in load. We saw for the second bullet points that policy forecast, or what we called it also, what do we call it? So the policy forecast that you saw, the roadmap also, called also the roadmap, is going to cause some issues within 10 years, which is really a concern for us, that we need to address that as soon as possible. We do see that if we continue with the current trend in DG growth, that we are going to exceed our system capacities in using that generation. So it will cause issues in our system if we don't do anything. And in terms of solutions, as you saw there are multiple utilities and multiple solutions that can be used to help us achieve our goals in terms of maintaining a reliable system, and also keeping those renewable goals. So there are multiple technologies to use, multiple key stakeholders that need to come to the table to come up with these solutions. And those are some of the technologies. The storage is part of it, curtailment, load management. In some cases, we might not have enough, so we would still need some grid upgrades there. Also, that there's an important point there about the grid support from inverters. Right now, we do have some support from outside of our system, from internally from synchronous generators. But inverters have a different technology, and so we would need them to provide some more support. It could be voltage, inertia, other kind of needs that maybe we can identify in the future as they become a larger portion of the generation mix. And of course, the statewide coordination is going to be very key to the reliability of the system. The NTA study is ongoing, and so the goal is to find the least cost solution to the problems that were identified. And so it is ongoing right now, and I think up to next year, right, Shana?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Rep Morrow and then Rep Campbell.
I have two questions. First one is, do you factor in demand growth into this scenario at all? Or how does that get factored in if we're using more demand close to the distributed power being generated? Is that factored into this analysis at all?
Yes, it definitely is. So in some cases, the growth of DG or solar is not a factor, and that's mainly in the winter because the peak happens around 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. on a January or February. So by then, the DG is basically at a zero. But outside of that, the load growth has been part of the growth is part of the forecast that we looked into. So that those cases that we use take into account the growth in load.
Okay, thank you. Second question is, obviously you guys have a map of transmission lines that need to be upgraded just because of age or storm damage or other reasons besides DG growth. How well does that overlap with some of these maps you've been showing us, both geographically and in the timeframes that we're talking about?
Yeah, I don't think I have an answer to that. Maybe I can get back with you on that.
Yeah, we can absolutely follow up
Yeah.
to identify where those two separate sides of the equation overlap in terms of transmission upgrades that would already be underway.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
I will look forward to that as well. Rep Campbell?
Sure. So my takeaway from this is a real sense of urgency about planning and building if that's necessary. I take it that's Velco's takeaway as well.
Well, I'll let Zakia answer first before I jump in.
But yeah, I think that's a key point of the message we have here is that we like you saw, we have issues that we identified as soon as 2029. And so it's 4 years from now, right? So we need to find solutions as quick as possible. If it's an NTA solution, great. If it's not, then we need to start thinking about approval of the lines, as you mentioned, by ISO, if that's it's possible, and the building and all that. So there's a lot of lead time and construction time that comes with transmission upgrades that needs to be factored there as well.
And I know you said, I'm sorry, I've forgotten. Remind me how long the NTA study takes, or when that's.
Sure. The NTA study, they'll be looking at solutions this year, and then the second year it goes more into kind of cost allocation. How do we pay for that distributed through Vermont? But I do want to just go back to say, in terms of certainly, a sense of urgency, this is our one kind of snapshot as we're looking out 10 and 20 years. I'll also say that we also do this plan every 3 years, and that's because, right, new technology, new data, and our load forecast is only as good as the data that we can receive from the rest of the Vermont stakeholders, including the distribution utilities. That's why it's important to have them all at the table when we start developing these load forecasts. And I point that out because I just want to make note that in our 2021 long-range transmission plan, we very much did the load forecast in a very similar fashion as the 2024 load forecast. But there was one input that's very different. In 2021, we assumed that 75% of electric vehicles throughout the state would be managed. And that essentially led to no reliability upgrades in the state in that 2021 plan. This 2024 plan, we really felt we didn't have the exact data to prove that out, to say that, yes, here's the data that says 75% can be managed. And so that's why we removed that assumption from our planning studies. As we start doing our planning studies for the 2027 plan, there may be new data that comes to the table that shifts these forecasts and outcomes. But at the baseline, if we do not have flexible load management to respond to this growth, load growth, then this is what it would take from a reliability requirement of Velco to maintain the system.
Yeah, Rep. Southworth.
Thank you. Do you, knowing it doesn't take a week to get planning and permitting in place, do you have any current projects going that would address some of this, or do you have any that are getting ready to start that process?
In terms of system upgrades?
Yes.
No, we do not have any projects that we have started or start working on to address this issue. I think the process is to go through the NTA analysis and figure out if there are solutions that are non-transmission first as a priority. And what is the least cost solution is first before we move to the next step.
Thank you.
Victoria?
I just wanted to mention that the PUC is studying this. They opened a docket. And there's some materials there, and Candace Morgan from GMP would be a good person for us to hear from.
Okay.
Because they're such a big part of our energy scene, and their IRP that they completed recently. It's going to be a key part of the planning. So.
Okay. All right, onward we go.
Okay. I think we have one last slide left, and that's considerations and resources. And I'm glad Representative Torrey just mentioned Green Mountain Power, because the integrated resource plans are a very important resource here as we're talking about flexible load management initiatives, and particularly with storage, because Green Mountain Power has done such a successful job in implementing storage to their customers. So what I wanted to note here, just a few considerations. We acknowledge the intent of H278, and would also like to emphasize that there are existing regulatory frameworks in Vermont that already support the integration of energy storage. With respect to transmission, as we've been talking about this past hour, Velco produces the long-range transmission plan, and we do that every 3 years to assess the transmission system's needs over time. And as things like peak load levels and generation resources are changing, that's really important that we continue those studies. And then as we've been discussing, once each iteration of our plan is finalized, the Vermont distribution utilities they have an obligation to look at those non-transmission alternatives to solve for the least cost solution. And so that work is guided through a very collaborative process that is open to the public, and it falls within that Vermont System Planning Committee. Now that's purely from a transmission constraint level. But then on the distribution side, each distribution utility also regularly updates their integrated resource plans, which is essentially a decision-making framework for their service territory needs. And if you're looking through those utility IRPs, many of them are incorporating flexible load management initiatives and storage within their plans. So it's a really great resource if you wanted to have an understanding of what is being done on the storage front in flexible load management side of things. So all that to say that there are plans and discussions that are happening on a very regular basis that provide pathways for appropriate energy storage integration. The second point here around financial viability, it's really to just say that the economic viability of energy storage really hinges on its ability to provide multiple grid services, and that's often referred as value stacking. So, for instance, a single battery system could simultaneously provide peak load shaving, where we know we're trying to hit a peak on our monthly peaks, and we can operate those batteries to try to basically shave that peak and then reduce electricity costs for customers. But there are other forms of functions for battery storage, and there's a whole list of them, but I wanted to make the point that they are often used for multiple functions. Another one could be frequency regulation, and that's really about enhancing grid stability. It's when the ISOs are calling on batteries to operate to make up for maybe some type of instability. And so the stacking of those services, that's what's really maximizing revenue streams and making storage projects more financially attractive to developers. And I think that's a really important point because storage is it's a capital intensive investment, and it's not always the most economical solution when compared to other alternatives. And to gain a deeper understanding of the most prevalent storage applications in Vermont, I would recommend consulting with the Public Service Department. They've produced a number of energy storage reports. I've linked in these resources to those reports. There's a lot of comprehensive information in there to just get a better understanding of those use cases for storage in Vermont. But because of that, this last point, energy storage use cases are highly variable and really situation dependent. And so that could really present a mapping challenge in terms of what's being proposed in H278. I'm not sure how valuable it would be, given that generation can either be or storage can either be load or generation, and that becomes complicated with that dual function, and it really depends on how the storage owner is going to operate the device, and they are typically operating that device in a way that's financially attractive to them. And so as we look at storage to solve our needs on the transmission system and even for distribution utilities, and I also recommend inviting the distribution utilities to come and talk about this bill. But storage is a tool that is paired with the problem that you want to resolve. And we are doing that through the BSPC planning process. And I assume distribution utilities are doing the same thing when they're looking at the problems on their systems and seeing where storage makes sense for their system and for their customers.
Thanks, Shayna. We are going to hear from Green Mountain Power. And as I mentioned, in reverse, walk through the bill tomorrow morning with Ledge Council, which I need to let our committee know. So bottom line, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I guess I'll just ask you, how is the process or the steps that are envisioned in H278 different from, less than, more than, unnecessary, necessary compared to the pretty extensive planning stuff that Velco is already doing?
Well, I do believe there's some overlap with the work that Velco has done for our long-range planning efforts. But I will say that there's a large portion of that bill is more designated to the distribution utilities. We do not have retail electric customers, and so we really have no insight into some of those components around cost benefit analysis and how that affects rates. And there was a number of requests for data in that bill that I think would be more directed to the distribution utilities. The way I think we see it is Velco, if this were to go through, having this type of a study, we would definitely be at the table and playing a supporting role in providing the data where it was meaningful from the transmission system.
Okay, thanks. That's really helpful. And we did invite Green Mountain Power. Just, I don't know how, we'll hear from some folks and then decide, where we go from here. But we really appreciate you all taking the time to come in. Are there any other questions for Shayna and Velco and
Zakia?
Where can I read about the N-1 scenario? And I guess you said it's either, when you stated, you said lose the line or lose two shorts on the line, or lose a generation and lose a line, particularly in those areas where you're showing overloads between New Haven and West Rutland.
Right. So a good resource is that link to the long-range transmission plan. There is quite a bit of information in terms of N-1 and why we do it. And if you have any specific questions about that assumption, we could certainly talk again and go into more depth if that's of interest.
And do you know the status of that line that was proposed coming over through Benson and on to Massachusetts?
The TDI New England Clean Power Link project that was going under Lake Champlain?
I believe so.
Right.
That doesn't help you at all?
Oh, well, that line would help Vermont. It would help Vermont. It's currently, I don't know of any plans for that line moving forward. I do know that they were very active in the regional request for proposals, meeting some of the regional needs, but I do not believe that project was selected. Going into not to go down the rabbit hole too far, but the region, the New England region has come together really for the first time, which is kind of amazing in terms of finding transmission projects that would help the New England region over the next 20 years. And all of the reason why this is amazing is that we've tried this a number of times, and we could never come to consensus on what that pay allocation would be from state to state. And I guess it was in 2023 when the states did come to an agreement of how it could be paid for. And so there are RFPs that are being developed right now, and we'll likely be seeing more than one coming down the road. And so I think for projects, those merchant developer projects like the New England Clean Power Link, that provides them a viable pathway to build transmission.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much again for joining us and for taking so much time and for your written testimony. And we will let you go about your day and